There's a resource nowadays that is richer than oil and gold, and yet it is readily available to every single person in an equal playing field. Yes, the richest people in the world are spending billions and billions and billions of dollars so that they can actually gather this resource for themselves. But if you're watching this right now, then chances are you can also very easily gather this. What I'm talking about is attention. The idea that we exist now in a digital age in which we are staring at screens, be it a computer or a phone, whatever it is. Right now, you're watching this video giving me your attention. And there's a value in that because we build our society now on the idea of having a following, having fans, having people that are going to invest in you, your company, whatever you're currently doing. We live in a social age, so that resource is the most valuable thing that we can be dealing with nowadays. And yet many of us go, yeah, I want that, but don't put much attention into how to properly put in place strategies and understandings, the ability to actually gather that resource for ourselves and build something with it. Now, this isn't to say that this isn't a resource that hasn't always been around. It absolutely has been. One of the strongest ways to gather that resource is storytelling, and we are a human civilization built on storytelling. You go back to the cavemen who were drawing pictures on the walls that told them about their environment. It told about the predators that they could go and capture and the ones that they should avoid because they might try and kill them. We go forward a few years and we start learning about the idea of crafting art, be it visual or auditory. The idea that we can imbue our emotions and our perspectives of this world into a song or a painting. The fact that we can just open up our phones and go mindlessly scrolling over and over and over gives this idea of an open economy. The one in which the resource itself isn't money, but it's attention. So why are we not understanding how to properly gather that attention through what we put out there? And after spending a lot of time with this question, with a lot of people that have this question, I've started to understand there is one core aspect that a lot of people don't understand. And that is the stories that they know how to tell. There are so many people that are afraid of public speaking more so than death. And that has somehow led into them going, oh, well, I'm not a storyteller. I don't know how to tell a story. And the fact is, if you ever talk to someone and there has been an engaging conversation, you have told a story from your perspective. That alone is so powerful. Everybody has a perspective and a story that someone else will find valuable. You may not see it in the moment, but trust me, it is there. And that's the whole point of this video. I want to try and give you an insight as to how to actually capture these ideas of stories that you have in your brain and share them with the world. Let's start at the very base level. Chances are you have a few stories that you tell aroundify. Hell, you may even have posted one or two of them online. And the fact that you can go, here is part of my life and I'm sharing it with you, that is an astounding thing that we have that we can share. Previously, I've talked about a concept of figuring out your purpose for life called Ikigai. And in that, it asks a few questions. So I made my own sort of Ikigai. And these are the ones that are going to give you the concepts that tell you your story. The first one being, what are you passionate about? What do you do in your spare time? When you're not working, when you get home from work, do you watch a show? Are you passionate about that show? Do you go golfing? Are you passionate about golfing? All of these are passions. All of these are things that you could probably talk about endlessly. The idea being that you have a thing that you love, and sharing that love, that enthusiasm is amazing. You can probably tell that I have an enthusiasm for actually telling stories. I hopefully am sharing that in the way I'm speaking right now, and there's value in that. That alone can give you so many stories. The second topic stolen from Ikigai is figuring out that in which you are good at. The idea of, okay, what do you do for your job? What skills have you spent time learning? What hobbies do you have on the side in which you are building up a skill set? All of these are things that which will give you a skill, something that will give you a value that other people may not have. If you struggle with this, think about all the different things that you've been complimented in. Are you good at sports? Are you really stylish in the way you dress yourself? These are things that you can then share your insights to. The idea being that, yes, here is something that I didn't know, now I know. Let me imbue you with this knowledge so that you can take that first step. And then going off of that, the third column is actually quite similar to that one, except it's opened up more to just more of your experiences. It doesn't mean something you need to be good at. It is something that you can go, hey, here is something that I experienced and I learned from. The idea being that we all have individual experiences. We all have an individual life that we share. The insights gained from that are astounding. You may have gone through something that very little people have gone through or are going through right now. And just the idea of being able to go, here is how I dealt with it. Those three columns alone, passion, being good at something, and having an experience in something, all of those are wonderful breeding grounds to actually start figuring out what your stories are. So go ahead, write down 3 columns and start writing down, say, 7 items in each of those. What are you passionate about in your life? What are you good at? And what experiences do you have that make it unique to you? And if you can create just 7 different ideas or themes or topics or even stories that you can remember from those things, then you have an amazing starting point. Now, once you have those ideas and topics, you can turn them into stories. The ideas being those things that go, hey, there is something here, let me try and develop it. And chances are, you may have tried to tell these stories before and failed. You may have tried to tell a story about how you dealt with this certain problem and it didn't really go anywhere. It kind of fell on deaf ears. But guess what? That's fine. You can retell that story. You can refine it. The greatest stories in the world weren't the first draft. What you have to do is start telling it over and over. And there's different structures that you can use in order to better refine that story. My personal one is a variation on the hero's journey. Now, if you've ever dealt with storytelling at all, you've probably heard of The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell. The idea that there is the hero at the beginning that doesn't want to do the journey, doesn't want to go on an adventure, but there's a call to action. Something happened and goes, well, now I need to. And then along the way, they find a mentor that starts teaching them the things that they need to know, starts guiding them in the right direction. And just as they're starting to figure things out, there's a huge blow, something that drags them back down to the darkest moment that they're in. But in that moment, there's something to have been learned. From there, they start to build themselves back up, a new perspective, beating that final boss, that final struggle, and then going back home a changed person. That's an amazing thing. You can find that in all of the stories that we find valuable nowadays. So I've gone through and I've broken this down into 2 different sections to start questioning about your story, to start outlining what this is going to be. And from that, you can really start to refine your story, telling it over and over. The first part of this is actually defining the roles in the story. There is the hero, there is the mentor, and then there is the villain. Now, for most stories, as we tell them, if it is from your perspective, you are telling the story when you are the hero, going through all of the things that you've learned, the challenges, and then finally what you've learned at the end. Also, the hero can be someone else. It can be the person that you are trying to show the way. And in that fact, you then become the second category, the mentor, the person that sees someone else struggling and thinking, I can help them through this. I can stand next to them as I guide them through this thing. I might not be the hero of this journey, but I can help this story be told through their perspective. Here's the things I've learned. Here's what I can imbue in you, give you that power to take the next step forward. And finally, sometimes we just do the villain of our own stories. We are the person stopping the progress. We are the person that is the problem. We can be each of these. This story can be told from each of these perspectives. But who else can fit in these roles? Well, it doesn't just need to be people. If you're telling the story of that time that you struggled to succeed, then the problem itself is the fact that you can't succeed. And that is your villain. Your villain is the opposing force, the struggle. What about the mentor? Well, nowadays it doesn't need to be a person. It could be a show you watched. It could be a video that imbued some sort of knowledge in you. It could be a textbook. It could be simply something that you bought that made something easier. All of these are items or concepts that can become the mentor because they helped guide you to the next stage of your journey. So figure out what those 3 roles are. Who is the hero, who is the mentor, and who is the villain? Because once you have those, you can move on to step 2. And step 2 is actually going with that framework, figuring out what your call to action was. At the beginning of your journey, you didn't want to start this one, but what was the thing that made you go, no, this is the journey that I'm going down? Maybe it's that you finally went, oh, that's something that can happen? I want that to happen to me. Whatever that inciting moment is, that call to action, define it. Tell it from an emotional perspective. What is the driving factor? Share the passion behind the actual driving factor. Because once you have that, eventually you're going to hit a point where you go, I didn't know what to do. And that's when you bring in your mentor. The idea of defining this savior, this one that when you thought nothing was working, you got that glimpse of guidance that led you down the next path. What was the moment like when you first met them? There's always that moment where the mentor comes and gives that extra meaning behind the journey. So what is that for you? Then, chances are, you're going to be going through this journey. So start telling it. Start telling the first parts of the story, building up your confidence, telling you, okay, this is possible. And then right when you start to think everything's going to work out, what was the setback? Every good journey has a moment where you lose everything. What was that? What was the moment in which you thought you were down and out? It was time to give up. It is only in those moments that we really understand the struggle. the passionate story behind the failure. Because in failure, we learn so much. And then in that moment, what was the revelation? What was the thing that made you go, I can get through this if this? What was that tool that you found that helped you properly get to that next stage, ready for that final battle? What was that insight that drastically changed how you saw everything? Because once you define that, you can move into that final battle. What was that final hurdle? Was it that you were studying for an exam and the exam was now? Each of your stories has that final battle aware from the beginning. It was the initial call to action. Because when you call to action, you need to figure out what that endpoint was. Because when you get there, everything's been leading up to it. Did you succeed? Did you fail? Both of these are valid options. Because at the end of it, there is still one more step, and that is returning home. The idea that the final battle has finished, whether you won or you lost. What did you learn from it? What was the thing that changed you fundamentally, that made you go, and even in failure, I still win? It could be the case that you just straight up won. You got that initial thing that you were looking for. Your call to action was to achieve X and you've gotten that X. What is that story? That's the structure of how I use most of my stories. Every time I'm making a post, every time I'm making a different video for someone, it's always figuring out what that story is. Now, there is other different story frameworks. This is the one that I personally like because I'm a giant nerd and it's so akin to most of the things that I surround myself in. It's the stories that I like because there is a key aspect in that. One thing you should always do is make the content that you want to see. There's no point making something that you would just scroll past because guess what? Other people will scroll past. But if you're making for you, you're making that story in a way that you would love to see it, then guess what? You would read it, you would watch it, you would listen to it, and so would so many other people because you are not alone in the way that you enjoy things. Sure, it may not be your immediate circle, but trust me, there are fans out there that love things the same way that you do. So figure out what those stories are. Take those initial 21 points from those categories, try and figure out a story from one of them or multiple and go, okay, who's the hero? Who's the mentor? Who's the villain? What's this structure? What's the call to action? Who was the mentor and how did they come into the story? What was the setback that pushed you back? What was the clarity and revelation that you gained? What was the final battle like? And finally, what was it like when you're returning home? When you first tell this story, chances are it's probably not going to be good. But like every story that we tell in public, we continually refine. It only gets better the more you do it. So tell it multiple ways. Write it as a blog post, record a video about it. Hell, make a podcast talking to someone about it. The idea here being that the content itself isn't the limiting factor. Just tell your story, refine it, tell it over and over. And eventually you'll have so many people like you that love your story and want to hear more. So if you're serious about telling your story, I have a worksheet in the downloadable link below. And that way you can actually go through the structure that we've talked to today and start figuring out what your stories are going to be. Likewise, if you're wanting to take the next step, my coaching is now opened once again so that you can start actually working one-on-one with me over 4 weeks to properly refine your story, your content, and start making the content that you wish you could be making. Because it's very easy, but once you figure out the structures, you don't have to go through all the headaches to actually get it all done. So that's it for me, and I will see you next time.